Good evening and welcome to the BC Leaders Debate. I'm Jennifer Burke, your moderator for this evening's broadcast. And with just 2 weeks left until voting day, there is a lot on the line tonight for everyone. I'm pleased to be joined in studio by the leaders of BC's four major political parties. BC Conservative John Cummins, BC Liberal leader Christy Clark, the NDP's Adrian Dix, and Jane Sterk of the Green Party. Welcome to you all.
Thank you, Jennifer.
We will begin the debate in just a few moments, but first we want to give you a sense of how the next hour and a half will unfold. We're hoping in the next 90 minutes to give you some real insight into how the parties differ on key issues. We have consulted some of BC's top political observers in preparation, and we've also asked for your help in formulating questions for the leaders. Now, if you still have a question, you can email us at debatebc2013@gmail.com or tweet us at debatebc2013. If we do use your question on the air, we will need to confirm your full name and hometown, so please keep that in mind. Now, the leaders tonight will also have a chance to debate one another on issues like the economy, the environment, social policy, and leadership. We will, of course, be observing some very strict rules of order with timed sequences and a countdown clock, as you can see for yourself. If the leader continues past his or her time, we will indeed cut your mic, so you've been warned. When asked a direct question, the leader does have the floor, and interruptions will not be permitted. Now, we've also built in some time for something we call free debate, and we expect everyone to be respectful. And so let's begin. The leaders now have an opportunity to make their opening statements directly to you for a minute each. The speaking order was determined in a draw, and Adrian Dix is first. Mr. Dix, you have the floor.
Good evening. It's good to be here for this debate with Premier Clark, with Mr. Cummins, and with Ms. Sterk. They're all good people, all making a contribution to our province. The choice in this election is clear. Do we want 4 more years of more in the same after 12 long years of Liberal government? Or do we want to change to a new and better government? An NDP government will ensure a more prosperous society by investing in skills training and jobs, a more generous society by establishing a new BC family bonus to take children out of poverty, and protect our environment by ensuring that pipeline decisions are made right here in BC and ensure that we do our part in dealing with global climate change. We will say what we're going to do, and we'll say how we're going to pay for it. That's the way the NDP will govern, and that's the way we've run our campaign. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dix. Now over to Liberal leader Christy Clark. Ms. Clark, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you to my fellow leaders for being here tonight. And most of all, thank you to you for tuning in to find out what the issues are in this election campaign. I believe in British Columbians because I know that you are the ones that have worked hard to build this province. And it's my job to back you up. That's why I believe I should leave more money in your pocket because you can spend money better than government can. That's why I've been working for 2 years to protect our economy from the global economic turmoil that surrounds us every single day. We have a plan, and the plan is working. We're controlling government spending. We're putting BC on a path to being debt-free in 15 years. I believe that that is the right thing to do for our children, and that's why I'm so determined to do it. Tonight, I think you'll see that there is a stark choice in front of us. I look forward to telling you where I stand. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Ms. Clark. Now to the leader of the Green Party, Jane Sterk. Ms. Sterk.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good evening. For the past 4 years, we've been listening to you talk about the problems that are facing you and your family and the challenges in your communities. Many of the stories have been heartbreaking. But we've also heard you talk about the vision you have for healthy communities that create jobs for you, your kids, and your grandkids. Tonight, you'll hear the Liberals talk about you don't have problems because they know how to manage and grow the economy. And the BC NDP will say we don't have time for a grand vision because there are so many problems in British Columbia that we can only tweak here and toss a few crumbs there. The Green Party knows we must identify our problems and develop a long-term plan for solving those problems, and that we need to have a moral and ethical imperative to create an economy that's good for our kids and our grandkids.
Ms. Sterk, thank you very much. Let's move now to BC Conservative leader John Cummins. Mr. Cummins.
Thank you, and good evening. It's great to be talking to British Columbians this evening. Look, everyone knows that the Liberals can't win this election. So you've probably tuned in to see what Adrian Dix will look like as a premier. But I'm here to tell you, you have another choice. If you're sick of out-of-control government spending, if you're sick of cronies and insiders having a final say in Victoria, if you're sick of people having to leave British Columbia to find work, if you're sick of high taxes, if you're sick of a government that you can't trust, then there is an alternative, and that alternative is the BC Conservatives. We're the only party that will lower taxes, stand up for everyday British Columbians, and bring opportunity back to BC.
Mr. Cummins, thank you, and thank you all for keeping to time in this first segment. Let's move on now to something we like to call the burning question section of our debate, in which we ask each leader a question that is top of mind right now in the campaign. Once again, the order was determined in a draw. Each leader will have 1 minute and 15 seconds to answer. We'll go first to the NDP. Mr. Dix, between the Kinder Morgan Pipeline, Northern Gateway, and others, you have opposed almost every major resource project that's come before you. How do you expect to create those skilled jobs and grow the BC economy when your answers always seem to be no?
My answer is generally yes. I just don't believe it's a choice between our economy and our environment. I think it's yes to LNG, as long as we ensure we protect our water resource in the Northeast. I think it's yes to forestry. We do have to make sure that we keep logs in BC to create jobs in BC. I believe the answer is yes for mining, where especially if we can reduce the wait times currently suffered by the industry because of government cuts. I think it's yes to film and television, where we can compete with anyone in North America. I think it's yes to tourism, especially if we give the tourism industry control over its marketing. What I don't agree with is in these times saying that we should abandon our commitment to climate change. When I talk to business people across BC, they're with me on this question. They understand that this is an important issue, that the future of our economy depends on it. And you don't have to tell interior communities who are losing because timber supply areas are faced with trees that are dead because of the mountain pine beetle that climate change doesn't matter to them. We can have the economy, create jobs, and ensure that we protect the environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dix. Our next burning question goes to Liberal leader Christy Clark. Ms. Clark, you have admitted you made a mistake by running a red light with your son and a reporter in the car. Many would consider that reckless action and a reckless decision, especially for someone who should be setting an example as a mother and as a political leader. What would you say to voters who are seriously questioning your judgment now as a result of this incident?
Thank you, Jennifer. There is no other answer for the people of British Columbia other than to say that it was wrong. I was wrong to do it. And I strive as a parent to set a great example for my son, and I didn't. When I stopped and I treated that red light like it was a four-way stop. Doesn't matter what time of day it was, I shouldn't have done it. And you know, over my 11 years as a parent, I have made more than one mistake. That's true. But I do want you to know that I have worked really hard as a parent to do the best that I can to raise my son Hamish, to be a young man with the kind of character that we want to be a great citizen in British Columbia. And being a parent has meant this for me. It's meant that I've really come to understand how important families are in British Columbia. Families are the most important building block of any society. And parents do the hardest job in the world. I find it hard sometimes, and sometimes I don't succeed. But I do my best at that. But you know, Jennifer, in this election campaign, what we're talking about is how we're going to make sure that future is the right one for our kids. And that's why these questions, whether they're about the economy or about my judgment, matter so much.
I have to stop you there. Thank you very much, Ms. Clark. Our next question goes to Jane Sterk, leader of the Greens. Ms. Sterk, how do you convince voters that the Greens are not simply a so-called one-trick pony, a one-trick pony political party with the sole focus only on the environment in this province?
Thanks for that question, Jennifer. The Green Party has never been a one-issue party. If you look at our policy, which is always available for people to explore, we have great policy on the environment, on the economy, on our social services, and more than any other party on democratic reform. The Green Party believes that we must be accountable to the people of British Columbia, and so we go out to the people of British Columbia and say, what do you think about our policy? We go to experts to get their input on how we fill the gaps in our policy. I'm very proud of our economic policy. We have this philosophy in our governments that we can continue to have a growth-based economy that's fueled by debt and cheap fossil fuels. And we see globally that that's not going to work for much longer. And so the Green Party is focused on how can we create made in BC economies that are based in strong local economies. And in every region of British Columbia, whether it's Nelson or Nanaimo, we will create those strong local economies. And our social services are better than any other party if you believe that we should be taking care of the most vulnerable people in British Columbia.
Ms. Stirk, thank you. And our final burning question goes to Mr. Cummins. Mr. Cummins, over the past year, your party has seen much turmoil, as well as some ongoing questions about your leadership. Your only sitting MLA quit, and you've lost 4 candidates since the campaign began. Why should voters believe, with this record, that you are ready to lead the province?
Well, I think that we've done very, very well in the past year. Certainly we've had our ups and downs, but I think that with a new party such as ours, that's to be expected. If you look at our candidate screening process, I think that it's second to none in this province. We have a very thorough 42-page questionnaire. We do credit checks, we do criminal record checks, a whole string of issues. There's times when people can slip through the cracks when things happen, but we've been very proactive in that in seeking out to determine whether or not our candidates made inappropriate statements, and when it's happened, we've eliminated them. If you compare our actions to that of the Liberals, for example, they had a member who was charged and convicted of drinking while under the influence. That candidate is still running. We eliminated a candidate. We pulled the papers of a candidate who did that. We look at Mr. Foster. The Auditor General accused him of some very unsavory dealings in the construction and repairs of his constituency office, and yet he still stands as a candidate. I think that our record compared to the records of other parties in this province is stellar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cummins. Let's move now to the second round of our burning questions. And here, the leaders will have an opportunity to question one another with the following format. The leader asking the question has 15 seconds to ask that question. The respondents will have 45 seconds to reply, at which point the ball gets tossed back to the questioner, and then the gloves are off for an additional 45 seconds. Now, each leader chose which other leader they would question by draw. And we begin, first of all, tonight with John Cummins with a question for Ms. Clark.
Premier Clark, you raised small business taxes, gas taxes, income taxes, MSP premiums, ICBC rates, added $11 billion to the debt, and hiked government spending. How can you pretend to be a fiscal conservative?
Thank you for that, Mr. Cummins. Well, we have worked hard in this last 2 years since I became Premier to make sure we're keeping taxes down. 97% of British Columbians pay the lowest taxes of anywhere in this country. And when you look at the total burden on British Columbians, again, it's amongst the lowest in Canada. We have balanced our budget, and we are putting British Columbia on a path to being debt-free. And I'll tell you why that matters to me. Because I grew up in a family in Burnaby. My dad was a school teacher, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. They did not have a lot of money to go around. But they made tough decisions, and they made those tough decisions because they wanted us to be better off than they were. We can now put our province on a path to being debt-free because we've balanced our budget. I think it's the right thing to do for our kids. We can do it, so we should do it.
You may begin your response, Mr. Cummins.
Premier Clark, I think that you're the only one in British Columbia that believes that you balanced the budget. You had to sell off valuable government assets to do that. It's like selling off one room of your house to pay the mortgage. Sooner or later, you're going to run out of rooms. In my view, the economy in British Columbia is not strong. It needs control over spending. We don't see that. Spending is simply running wild in this province. I think that if you talk about eliminating the debt, and again, I think it's a fantasy. You're projecting 15 years down the road that somehow this is going to happen.
Mr.
Again,
Cummins, if you want to talk about a fantasy, you want to add 30% in new spending to the provincial budget. You have no plan to pay for it. Mr. Cummins, you are not going to balance the budget.
well, you're like opening a bank account. Your fantasy of paying off the debt is like opening a bank account and expecting 15 years down the road it's going to be someone's going to miraculously put money in it.
I need to ask you both to stop. Thank you for that. Our next round of questions comes from Jane Stirk with a question for Adrian Dix.
Mr. Dix, your stance on Kinder Morgan suggests more like you're concerned about tanker traffic on BC's coast, tanker traffic in Vancouver Harbour, and tanker traffic at the Delta Port. Are you just concerned about tankers or pipelines or both?
I'm concerned about both, in fact, but I think most British Columbians are concerned that the vast majority, in fact, the vast majority of British Columbians are concerned about a ninefold increase in tanker traffic. That's why on the issue of Enbridge Northern Gateway, we submitted to the national review of that and said clearly we didn't think that Enbridge Northern Gateway was in our economic and environmental interest. Then we said that we were going to end the equivalency agreement with the federal government that would have meant that Ottawa, the government in Ottawa, make our decision about these pipelines. And on Earth Day, I said, because I agree with the majority of British Columbians that we shouldn't see that increase in tanker traffic, and I didn't think these pipelines were in the provincial interests, I said clearly, I don't support that. I think that's a position that British Columbia can get behind. I know it's a position you support, and it's one that we have to, I think, insist on.
Yes, you're correct. We definitely support no pipelines and no increase in tanker traffic. It sounded like you were saying no to Vancouver Harbour and Delta Port, and are you also saying no to Cherry Point in the U.S., or is there a possibility that you would accept a diversion of the line to the U.S. and tanker traffic out the Strait of Juan de Fuca?
My clear position is that the tanker traffic doesn't make sense. And if people listening to us want to see that clear position, the clear position we've set out, we've put it out on our website with respect to Enbridge Northern Gateway. I think that what we've done, which is to take control of these decisions back to British Columbia, decisions that I think are central to the future of the economy and the environment of British Columbia, to take back that control is important.
An environmental assessment could simply be a delay, and John Horgan, your energy critic, went to Kinder Morgan after you made this announcement.
That's
We
not
need to
the
leave
case.
it at that, I'm afraid, and move on to our next question, please. This one is from Adrian Dix, who has a question for Christy Clark.
Premier Clark, 30 days ago, we were still paying the HST, and if you'd had your way, we'd still be paying it now. Why do you think the Liberal government should be rewarded for this policy failure?
Well, I became Premier 2 years ago after the decision to move to the HST was made. And what I said when I became Premier is I said, I'm going to let British Columbians make their decision about the HST, and I will respect it. So I put it to a referendum. I asked you what you thought about it, and I respected that decision. And you know, the important thing about that is making sure that people get to be a part of their government, that people can have a say in what goes on in government. But the bigger question now for us is, how do we grow the economy? How do we make sure we're putting people to work in British Columbia and creating jobs? What you propose to do, Mr. Dix, is grow government. You propose to rack up debt, raise taxes, and send our kids to Alberta for work. The future for British Columbia lies in growing a thriving private sector economy, and that's what I stand for.
Mr. Dix?
Well, that answer tells you why we need a change in British Columbia. Premier Clark, you led the campaign for the HST. You spent $6 million in public funds to do it. Your party said before the last election you weren't going to bring it in, and it damaged every business in British Columbia on the way in and on the way out. That, I think, was the wrong approach. It's why in this campaign we've said clearly what we're going to do and clearly how we're going to pay for it. And that's the difference between the Liberal approach and our own.
Mr. Dix, the thing is, you haven't said how you're going to pay for anything. You put out your platform. Everyone agrees that it's only partly costed for British Columbians. You haven't said how you're going to pay for $3 billion worth of new government spending. We cannot afford that kind of out-of-control spending in British Columbia.
Those very claims that you made were shown to be not true.
Which is something you say you don't support on one hand,
Premier Clark, you say debt-free on the side of your bus, debt-free on the side of your bus, and you're overseeing the largest increase in debt in BC history.
Let's leave that question at that because our next burning question goes to Ms. Christy Clark with a question for Adrian Dix.
Well, thank you for that. Mr. Dix, you know, in our budget, we put aside $1,200 for every parent to be able to pay for their children's education. You propose to claw that back without any questions asked. Do you think that's fair to take that away, that money away from parents that they could be deciding how to spend themselves? Why do you think that you could spend it better than they can?
You know, I think it shows a little bit what's wrong with this campaign. The Liberal Party currently on Chinese language radio is saying that we're trying to steal money from kids. Nothing could be further from the truth. Every penny in that fund will be spent on kids. We're just not using the ill-advised scheme, which would essentially freeze out 50% of the children in British Columbia from taking advantage of it and investing now when kids need it now. We have the highest level of child poverty in the country. And I think children now deserve action. Not 10 years from now, but now. And that's the difference, I think, between the Premier's position and my own. It's a reasonable debate. They're running negative ads. We've put forward a positive proposal.
I want to be really clear about what this is. This is $1,200 for every parent, put aside in an RESP for every child in British Columbia, 6 and under every child today, 6 and under, and every child that's born tomorrow and the day after. That money is yours. It belongs to parents to be able to put aside and decide how you want to spend it for your kids. And what Mr. Dix is proposing is to take that back, because there is a stark philosophical difference between us.
No,
I believe that you as parents can make better decisions about how to spend money for your children, and Mr. Dix believes that government can make those decisions better than you
Premier
can.
Clark, I think children in British Columbia deserve action now. I don't think it's acceptable that we have the highest level of child poverty in the country. And doing nothing is not an option. And that's what we've had.
You would take
That's what
that
we've
money
had
from
for 12
everyone,
years.
so you
We
would take that
ensure
money from the
every
many,
penny of that
so you
money,
could spend it on the
every
few, Mr.
penny
Dix,
of that
so
money.
that you could spend it, not
Every
so that
penny of
parents
that
in
money
British
will go
Columbia
to
could
children
spend
in
it.
British Columbia, Premier Clark.
I need to stop you there. Thank you both. And we just want to remind our viewers and our listeners that we are still taking your questions for the leaders. As you can see, we have a lively debate underway, a lively format. You can email us at debatebc2013@gmail.com. Tweet us at debatebc2013. Let's move on now to the debate on the economy. And we begin this segment with our questions, and then the leaders will have 1 minute and 15 seconds to answer. Our first question in this particular topic is for the Green Party, Ms. Sturck. We want to ask you, your party is advocating for a 66% increase in the carbon tax. What do you say to voters who feel that they are already maxed out when it comes to taxes in this province?
Well, Jennifer, the carbon tax has been a very popular tax in this province. And when there was a suggestion that we might do away with the carbon tax, the people of British Columbia said no. We think that acting on climate change is critically important. And we're doing exactly what the economists and the environmentalists say we should do if we want to get our carbon emissions under control. And that's to continue the gradual increase in the carbon tax and make sure that part of the reason we want to do that is to make sure that there's a level playing field for other renewable energy companies. For instance, we just heard that Finnevera Wind today is leaving British Columbia because there isn't a level playing field and they can't get their projects approved in British Columbia. And so for two reasons, you should vote for the Green Party, because we do stand for a strong and universal carbon tax, because we need to act on climate change, the climate crisis. We need to do it now and not sometime in the future, and because we need a level playing field so renewable energy companies can actually do business in BC.
Ms. Sturck, thank you. Our next question is to Mr. Dix. Mr. Dix, the BC Liberals are campaigning heavily on eliminating the provincial debt, yet we have heard almost nothing from the NDP about your plans on the issue. Now, your platform projects 3 years of deficits totaling approximately $2 billion. If elected, when do you plan to balance the budget and how?
I think balancing the budget is a high priority. That's why every item in our platform is costed, and we say where every item is paid for. I think saying what you're going to do and saying how you're going to pay for it is particularly important after the Liberal government's experience with the HST. Here are the tax changes we're going to make, because we believe that those who have can afford to pay a little more to deal with these difficult fiscal times. Firstly, we're going to return corporate tax levels paid by big business to 2008 levels. Secondly, we're going to reinstate a minimum tax on the big banks. Thirdly, we're going to ensure that the natural gas industry on its venting pays the carbon tax just like all of you. And fourthly, and importantly, I think, we're going to ensure that 98% of taxpayers see no increase in their income tax, but there is new tax paid by those over $150,000. To get to a balanced budget, we can't do what the Liberal Party has been doing, simply claiming it without doing the work. It's going to require hard work, and where we start is saying what we're going to do and saying how we're going to pay for it.
Mr. Dix, thank you. Our next question on the economy goes to Ms. Clark. Ms. Clark, one of the pillars of your platform is a promise to eliminate BC's debt. However, the provincial debt in this province has doubled under your government, including an $11 billion increase on your watch. You have also repeatedly claimed that Moody's Investor Services has said your budget is balanced, when Moody's has said no such thing. Don't British Columbians deserve a leader who will give them the straight goods?
Thank you, Jennifer. I became Premier 2 years ago, and when I became Premier, I started working, first of all, on getting government spending under control. Then we worked on balancing the budget, which we've done. Now that we are balanced, we are in a position to start eliminating the debt for our kids. We can do this, and we should do it, because that's a basic British Columbia value that we all stand for. The only way that we will get to a debt-free BC is if we make sure we are controlling government spending. My government has a better record of controlling government spending than any other government in the country. We did it last year, and we're going to do it this year. You compare that to the out-of-control spending that the NDP is proposing for British Columbia, it's going to mean higher taxes, and it will mean that we are likely never able to balance a budget. And here's how I characterize this. The NDP plan would rob Peter to pay Paul, hoping that Paul will vote for the NDP. My plan is to put both Peter and Paul to work so that they can realize the great opportunities of this province, and they won't have to wait for government to be there to give them a hand. They can do it because they want to get out there and build British Columbia with all the rest of us.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Our next question goes to Mr. Cummins. And Mr. Cummins, a major focus of your campaign has been on fiscal prudence and debt elimination. However, you have also promised to eliminate the carbon tax. So our question is, what government services do you propose to cut to make up for the lost revenue from the carbon tax?
Well, we've actually committed to eliminating the carbon tax about 1.5 years ago. The carbon tax is a punitive tax. It hurts people who live in the north. It hurts them because it's great distances that they have to drive, because everything that comes into the communities has to be shipped in by truck, and they're paying 7 cents a litre. It hurts commuters who don't have the option of using a bus, because again, they're paying that 7 cents a litre to drive their cars to work. It hurts consumers, as I say, in rural areas, but it's also very difficult for businesses. It's hurtful to the agricultural industry, grain farmers and the peace, $4,000 a year in fuel, in carbon taxes, ranchers, $2,000 a year. It's killing the cement industry here in British Columbia. We can pay for that because of 2 reasons. One is we eliminate the credit advantages, the tax advantages that went to low-income families and rural or northern people that was tied to the carbon tax. But secondly, what we're looking for is to find $1.2 billion in savings out of a $46 billion budget. As fiscal conservatives, we can do that.
Mr. Cummins, thank you. Now the leaders will have a chance to question one another on the economy. And once again, the order was determined in a draw. And the format here is the same as before. The leader of the first question, it's in a leader-to-leader debate, will have 15 seconds to ask a question, followed by a 45-second uninterrupted answer. Then it goes back to the questioner, and there is 45 seconds of free debate between the 2 leaders if they so choose. Jane Sturck has the first question for Christy Clark.
Ms. Clark, Aeolus Wind Power has a project on Thunder Mountain that had broadly based community, First Nations, and environmentalist support, and they simply could not get their project approved. Why would a free enterprise party get in the way of doing business in BC?
We shouldn't. We should make sure that we can make it easier for everybody to do business in this province. And, specific projects pose specific challenges, and not every project passes its reviews. But we have been working really hard to make sure that we are getting to yes on economic development projects. Because if we don't get to yes, if we don't believe in economic development, if the answer is no to every economic development project out there, we won't create jobs. And you know, it's important that we provide the services that people need, hospitals, schools, all those things that we count on. The reason we can get those is because people are going to work. The reason people are going to work is because we're growing the economy. And we grow the economy by saying yes. There are lots of projects out there to which we have said yes, and we're going to keep doing it.
But your government is not saying yes to renewable energy projects like wind. And those projects, those companies want to do business in British Columbia. They are willing to do it on an independent basis. They don't need government support. And yet BC Hydro is an impediment to doing business in this province if you are in real renewable energy. And I don't understand. This seems to be a no-brainer to me in terms of a party that says that they believe in that private investment within British Columbia, that you're not doing it.
I can tell you the answer to that. BC Hydro balances three things. How do we make sure that we are respecting the environment, keeping rates low, and also making sure that BC Hydro is sustainable in the long term? And we have to keep rates low. So not everything, not every project passes its review, but I can tell you, Jane, for me, making sure that economic development projects move forward is something I absolutely believe in, because that is what's going to mean that we can change all the things that matter to us.
Please. I'm
and put
sorry, I
people
need
to
to
work in
interrupt.
British
We're out of
Columbia.
time for that particular question, but now Mr. Dix has chosen to direct his economic question to Christy Clark.
Since 2011, when you launched your jobs plan, BC has lost private sector jobs. Neither Peter nor Paul are working. Wasn't the jobs plan supposed to be the centerpiece of your government?
Absolutely. And since we introduced the jobs plan in September 2011, British Columbia has gained over 32,000 net new jobs. And those are jobs that are putting people to work in every corner of the province, in projects that we believe in, because we're working hard to grow economic development and grow our economy in mining, in natural gas, in technology, all of those areas that really matter to communities large and small, all of those jobs that help us pay for all the things that we need. The contrast between you and I, Mr. Dix, is I believe in growing the economy as a way to sustain British Columbia. You believe in growing government, and what all that is going to mean is that we have to raise taxes, we never balance our budget, and it won't put a single person to work in our province.
You may respond, Mr. Dix.
Premier Clark, the facts are clear. I know they're not your facts, they're the facts. And those facts, you can look them up on the internet, show that since the Premier launched her jobs plan, we've lost 34,800 private sector jobs. That's what's happened. In the radio debate on Friday, the Premier, who had spent $16 million of your money advertising that jobs plan, didn't even mention it. And there's a good reason for that. The government has cut skills training, which is the foundation, I think. Every time I meet with business people, they say that's the foundation of job creation in BC. Instead of investing in skills training, the government has cut skills training at this crucial moment.
There are two pieces to the puzzle. One is the jobs training, which we're investing in. The other is making sure that there are jobs for people to go to.
But why did you cut skills training in a skills shortage?
In your plan, Mr. Dix, you're talking about training people and getting them the education that they need to go find jobs in Alberta. That is not the kind of British Columbia that any of us want to live in.
We're losing jobs to Alberta right now.
Let's
set the record.
Let's move from this question, please, because our next leader, Christy Clark, has a question on the economy for Mr. Dix.
Yes, thank you. You know, Mr. Dix, you say that you support liquefied natural gas, but your candidates say they want a 2-year moratorium on getting it out of the ground. How can you support a new economic project with liquefied natural gas if you won't even get it out of the ground so that we can export it to places in Asia?
Well, what the Premier is saying is not true, and the Premier knows it. This is their campaign. They're on the attack all the time. I support liquefied natural gas. I support the skills training that we will need to build liquefied natural gas, to ensure that young people and everyone across British Columbia can benefit through jobs from that project. In Australia, on liquefied natural gas, a skills shortage threatened that prosperity. Here, we need investment. The Premier is referring to a review we're going to do of hydraulic fracturing or fracking to ensure that water resources are used properly. The person who supported that review, who said that review was no problem, the Premier's current colleague and former Energy Minister, Blair Leckstrom. This is just so much politics.
Well, thanks. I don't think it is. I mean, Mr. Dix, your candidate in the Caribou said it was going to be a 2-year moratorium. Your candidate in Vancouver said he wanted a 2-year wanted a moratorium. Your energy critic said they wanted a moratorium. You don't support getting it out of the ground. You don't support the transmission that's required to get it to the Northwest. You don't support Site C, which would be required to power it up, and you don't support the increase in shipping that's going to be required to get it to Asia, Mr. Dix. On one hand,
Mr. Leckstrom
no, hang on a
says
second. I've got a question for you.
Oh,
On one
well,
hand,
it's good.
you say you support liquefied natural gas, but you don't support any of the things that are needed to get it. How do you explain that?
Premier Clark, you're not supporting skills training. You're cutting skills training. That's on the record. And the idea that we can't have a safe industry, certainly nobody in the natural gas industry agrees with you, that protecting water resources threatens their industry.
Mr.
They
Dix?
welcome a review, and so do I.
I need to interrupt you so we can move on. Mr. Cummins has a question on the economy for Ms. Clark.
Premier Clark, you've made expanding BC's trade to Asia the centerpiece of your government. But our exports are doing so badly, we've now fallen behind landlocked Saskatchewan. How can you explain this?
Well, I think it's good to have competition in the country, that's for sure. We have done very well in expanding trade to Asia. And we've done it, we started in forestry 10 years ago, and we have expanded trade in softwood lumber by over $1 billion. That has kept a lot of people working in sawmills all across the province. Now we are working to try and make sure that we expand trade with Asia in other sectors as well, clean energy being one of them, technology, forestry, of course, and mining, and liquefied natural gas. The next thing we need to do is expand that trade with India. India has one of the fastest growing middle classes humanity has ever seen. If we want to grow our economy, as opposed to growing government, we need to invest in those trade opportunities in Asia and India. That is very much the future for our province.
Mr. Cummins?
Well, the cold hard facts are, Premier Clark, that landlocked Saskatchewan now exports more than we do. British Columbia was some of the finest ports in the world. Under your leadership, British Columbia is falling far behind. The average family in British Columbia pays more in taxes, fees, and surcharges than any family west of Quebec. We're falling behind against the provinces we compete with. Our unemployment rate is higher than Alberta's, Saskatchewan's, and Manitoba's. People keep leaving British Columbia looking for work elsewhere. Since you became Premier, BC has a net loss of 10,000 people.
But Mr. Cummins, it's not true that our trade has gone down, and it's not true that our population is shrinking. Our trade with China has increased, and it's increased substantially since I've been Premier. I did 3 trade missions to go to Asia and India, and it's worked. Thank you, Jennifer.
Let's move on to the topic of the environment. And the first question is to NDP leader Adrian Dix. Mr. Dix, in the last week you have dramatically reversed your position on the Kinder Morgan pipeline proposal. On Friday, one of your candidates contradicted your position on fracking, saying that there would be a moratorium rather than a review. Given this, how can voters be assured that you and your party take consistent positions and will ultimately stick to your word?
Because what we said very clearly is what we're going to do before the election. British Columbians don't support a 9-fold increase in tanker traffic. I decided, upon reflection, to make clear our position before the election. I think all the parties should do that. I think that's important even for the proponent to understand where the province is going. That a 9-fold increase in tanker traffic threatens our coast. That a 9-fold increase in tanker traffic will transform the economy and the environment of Metro Vancouver. So I've been very clear on those questions. It's all laid out in the NDP platform. We've also given, I think, a very clear position on the issue of climate change. I'm for using the carbon tax to support transit and other environmental initiatives, the existing carbon tax. I'm for bringing in a law that would ban cosmetic pesticides, something the Premier promised in her by-election and then broke her promise. I'm for maintaining current climate change targets. I think by setting out a clear position in this campaign and by saying clearly what we would do on Enbridge Northern Gateway and Kinder Morgan, I think the public can understand where we're going to take the province over the next 4 years on a pipeline issue that is central to the economy and environment of British Columbia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dix. Continuing on the environment and focusing on pipelines to the BC Liberals now, Ms. Clark, you laid out 5 conditions for approval of oil pipelines. like Northern Gateway, for example. These included BC getting a fair share of the economic benefits of a pipeline through the province. But in essence, aren't you saying that you are prepared to risk an oil spill and possible environment destruction if the price is right?
What I've said with the 5 conditions has been really clear. I stood up, I went to Halifax with all the other premiers, and they did not like the position that I took. I sat around the table with them. They tried to persuade me to change my mind. I looked around. I didn't see another premier that was elected to stand up for British Columbia. So I stood my ground. And the 5 conditions are this. 3 of them are environmental. 1 means that First Nations must be involved, and 1 means we must get our fair share. If any one of those 5 conditions is not met, there can be no expansion of heavy oil movement through British Columbia. I think the way that we protect our coast is by sticking by our principles, by standing up for what we believe in, making sure that it's consistent and making sure that it's clear. That's how we're going to make sure that we protect our coast and we protect our pristine environment for future generations of British Columbians.
I'd like to move the environment question now to Mr. Cummins. Mr. Cummins, you support a major expansion of shipments of Alberta crude through BC and a repeal of the carbon tax, as we mentioned earlier. Our question is, do you not believe that burning fossil fuels actually contributes to climate change, or are you just not prepared to do anything about it?
Well, the fact of the matter is that the carbon tax has done nothing to reduce or eliminate, if you will, BC's carbon footprint. It's been a total failure. What it has done is increase the cost of any goods that you have to transport. So it's increased the cost of living in communities in the north and in the interior, especially on Vancouver Island as well. It's just been an abject failure. When it comes to the environment, we're certainly pro-environment. I'm probably the only one at this table here who has earned a living that relied on the environment. I was a commercial fisherman for over 30 years. I know that you have to protect the environment if you're going to be catching fish. That's just the way it is. So we're certainly very protective of the environment. When you look at both the Northern Gateway Pipeline and the Kinder Morgan Pipeline, and you examine the technologies that are available today, I'm convinced that at the end of the day, when these reviews are done, that you will see that these pipelines can be done in a safe and environmentally friendly way. At the end of the day, we've got to balance economic development with whatever environmental risk that may ensue from those reviews, but I think that we should be going ahead with them.
Mr. Cummins, thank you. Ms. Sturck, given that BC's economy is historically based on natural resources, what industrial activities are acceptable in the Green Party's vision of the province?
Well, the Green Party believes that we could be a clean tech powerhouse in terms of our renewable energy strategies. We have geothermal potential. We're the only jurisdiction on the Ring of Fire that doesn't have geothermal energy in place. These companies want to do business in British Columbia. They want to make the investment that would make us a geothermal powerhouse, and geothermal energy could be produced once it's up and running for almost as little as we do our hydro energy. As I said earlier, we've got wind energy companies that are leaving British Columbia because they can't get the license to do business in British Columbia. Those are investments that we need to have in British Columbia. The Green Party sees an economy that's based in community, and that means that we would reinvest in our agriculture community in every part of British Columbia so that we could grow the food that we need. We're not going to be able to rely on California to provide our food, or China, or Argentina. We have to reinvest in our farming economy, and we believe that we need to reinvest in our social economy so that we bring to community the health services, the child services, and the social services that we need in community.
Thank you, Ms. Sturck. Once again, the leaders now get to question each other on environmental policy with the same format as the rest of the one-on-one debate. First question goes to Mr. Dix to Mr. Cummins.
Mr. Cummins, in your view, is climate change real? And what do you think the provincial government should do about it?
Well, certainly I believe that climate change is real. I think all British Columbians believe that climate change is happening. The fact of the matter is, I guess, when you consider climate change, it's what can we do as a society to make things better. Certainly the carbon tax has been an abject failure. BC's carbon footprint has increased over that time period. And all that's happened is that British Columbians who rely on the movement of goods to service their communities and so on have been penalized. They're the ones that have to pay the price. Commuters that go into Vancouver from south of the river have to pay the price on the fuel that they burn in their cars if there's no public transportation available. Those sorts of projects and initiatives may work fine in the city, but they don't help many other people.
Mr. Dix?
Well, I think, Mr. Cummins, we simply disagree on this. Here are some of the things we can do to address climate change now. We can use some of the resources from the carbon tax to invest in transit and other environmental initiatives. We can get rid of the Pacific Carbon Trust. Right now, the Liberal government is using money from hospitals and post-secondary institutions to fund big polluters. That doesn't make sense. We can ensure that our climate emissions targets are maintained. We can ensure that our parks are invested in. These are things we can do now, Mr. Clemens, to address the issue of climate change. Of course, this is an international question, but I don't think it's correct or right to ignore the issue and to say there's nothing we can do. There's strong things we can do right now.
The revenue from a carbon tax simply goes into general revenues. It's not a help at all to British Columbians. Well, it doesn't help.
Well, Mr. Cummins, we don't agree.
Let's move on. Christy Clark has a question to Adrian Dix on the environment.
Yeah, Mr. Dix, you said as a matter of principle that you would not comment on the Kinder Morgan pipeline, and then you jettisoned that principle and said you opposed the pipeline, and then your energy critic went to the company with a wink, wink, nudge, nudge and said, well, we don't really mean it. Will you tonight finally come clean on your position with respect to Kinder Morgan?
Oh, Premier Clark, I've answered that question twice already. I know it's in the script, but we've answered it twice already. I think it's a little rich talking about consistency here. I mean, the Premier has debt-free on the side of her bus, and she's overseeing the largest increase in debt in BC history. She's campaigning on balanced budgets, and she's run an $800 million deficits after 5 consecutive deficits. A jobs plan, they advertised $16 million that could have been used for other priorities. It's lost 34,800 private sector jobs. They say they're for reducing taxes, except they raise taxes in their budget. Our position on these pipeline questions is clear. The only person we don't know the position of is you, Premier Clark. The only person whose position is unclear is you, Premier Clark. Do you support, for example, Enbridge Northern Gateway or not?
You have a chance to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Dix. I have been, I think everybody knows that I took a very clear position on the 5 conditions, and that applies consistently to any movement of heavy oil through our province. So I'll just get that out of the way. But Mr. Dix, I still haven't heard, no, hold on a second. Hold on a second. I still haven't heard an answer from you on on my question about why there is no consistency in your party's position on this. It's something that does matter to British Columbians. And you know what it sounds like to me? You know what it sounds like to me? You sound like a man who has no trouble saying yes to new spending, but you have lots of trouble saying yes to new economic development for our province.
Well, that's simply not true, Premier Clark. And you look at your position on Enbridge Northern Gateway, which basically is, if the price is right, we'll sell out BC's interests. I don't agree with a 9-fold increase in tanker traffic off our coast. What's your position? Do you agree with that or not?
I need to interrupt, please. Mr. Cummins, you have a question on the environment for Mr. Dix.
Mr. Dix, you agree with us in our plan to abolish the Pacific Carbon Trust, but unlike us, you're planning to expand the carbon tax instead of abolishing it. I know and you know that the revenues from that carbon tax are going into the general funds, that it hasn't been effective. So isn't it just now a tax?
Well, Mr. Cummins, first of all, I think your plan over the next 3 years, your plan on just this one item would cost almost twice as much as our entire platform, $3.9 billion over 3 years. And I don't think you've clearly stated where you get the revenue. We think we should keep the carbon tax, and we think in the natural gas industry, they should pay the carbon tax for venting, just like you and me, their emissions, just like if you're driving from Langley or Williams Lake or anything else. I think that's a reasonable position. So I think there's a real difference here between you and me. One is that I'm not going to make a promise that I can't pay for, and I think that's the case with your promise. And secondly, I see climate change as a priority, and that we have to use every means to deal with that issue in our lifetime.
But Mr. Dix, the carbon tax has not been effective. It has not reduced British Columbia's footprint, and it's been very, very expensive to average, ordinary British Columbians. It doesn't do what it said it was supposed to be doing. That's the problem. the fact of the matter is that if we continue with this carbon tax and continue to tax people, we're taxing the very people that can ill afford to be paying it. I don't understand why you would be so struck on this carbon tax when in fact it just hasn't done what it's supposed to do.
Mr. Cummins, the responsible thing to do is to say where the money comes from for these promises, and that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing in this campaign. We're putting forward practical proposals for change.
$1.2 billion
requires
which
that.
out of a $46 billion budget. That's not hard for a fiscal conservative
I must
to
interrupt.
meet.
I'm sorry, I need to interrupt you both so we can move on to the final question on the environment, leader to leader. Ms. Stirk of the Greens would like to question Ms. Clark.
Ms. Clark, you just mentioned Site C, and Site C would destroy all kinds of Class 1 and Class 2 farmland. BC Hydro themselves said that most of our new power could come through conservation, and we know that this power is being generated for the gas industry in northeastern British Columbia, and it represents a subsidy on the gas industry. Why would you support something that will destroy farmland?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Stirk. One thing about you is you and I disagree on a lot of things, but I always know where you stand on the things that you believe in. And this is one where we disagree. I believe we need to have Site C in British Columbia. We need that power for our province. If we want to open up our province, if we want to continue to grow our economy in British Columbia so that we can put people to work, so that we can freeze income tax, so that we can freeze the carbon tax, then we have to make sure that we are continuing to invest in growing the economy. Site C is part of that. Site C is making sure that we can bring this generational opportunity of liquefied natural gas home for our kids. It's part of the clean energy plan to make sure that we can export that natural gas to Asia and put that money aside in a prosperity fund for our kids so that our province can be debt-free in 15 years.
Free debate.
So, Ms. Clark, you just said that the power from Site C is for the gas industry, so you're agreeing with me there. We're not pretending anymore that it's power for the rest of British Columbia. And I've just told you about two wind energy projects that couldn't get past BC Hydro. Finnavera Wind that's leaving the province because they can't do business here. It's too costly to go through the environmental assessment process. And so we're going to lose all of that investment that could be in British Columbia, real renewable investment, not liquid natural gas, which is a terrible way to base our future in British Columbia.
Ms. Stirk, again, this is where we disagree. To me, I look at liquefied natural gas and I see 100,000 net new jobs for British Columbia.
It's a fantasy. It's a
I see $100 billion going into
Premier
our prosperity
Clark,
fund
for
our kids for the long term. There hasn't been a chance for a generation.
Jobs created.
To make a difference in British Columbia,
shall we?
like this one, since W.A.C. Bennett created BC Hydro in the first place. I think we should
Ms.
seize
Clark.
it.
Thank you. I need to interrupt you on this matter because we do need to move on, and I would like to remind the audience we're taking questions for the leaders. You can email us at debatebc2013@gmail.com or tweet us at debatebc2013. Now, let's move on to social policy questions, and the first question I have is for Ms. Clark. Ms. Clark, your slogan since coming to power has been families first, but it is a fact that British Columbia has the second worst rate of child poverty in Canada. So how can you claim to be putting families first when the picture for low-income families and children in this province is terribly bleak?
Jennifer, it's a good question because child poverty is way, way too high in British Columbia. And yes, it's at its lowest level in 33 years, except for 1 year in 2008. Yes, the gap has been closed by 45% over the last 10 years, but it is still way, way too high. And we have to work really hard to try and make sure that we're doing everything we can to resolve child poverty in British Columbia. But here's what I know about child poverty. Child poverty starts with parent poverty. And parent poverty can be addressed in a number of different ways, most principally growing our economy and making sure people have good family supporting jobs in every corner of the province to be able to put food on the table for their kids. I raised the minimum wage the day after I became Premier, and it's gone up 3 times in the 2 years that I've been Premier. But ultimately, it's economic security. It's growing our economy, not growing government. It's keeping taxes low so you have more money to spend, not raising those taxes. That's what's going to resolve child poverty in the long run, and that's what we're working on.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Mr. Cummins, our next question is to you on social policy. In relation to First Nation issues, you say the starting point from a legal perspective is that Aboriginal title does not exist. You say that's where you start negotiations. So are you an enemy or at least an opponent of Aboriginal rights in this province?
Not at all. I think that when you talk about Aboriginal rights in this province, you have to go to the courts. And what is it that the courts are saying about Aboriginal rights and the rights of all British Columbians? I think that the courts have been very, very clear, from Delgamuukw probably to the latest decision, and that was the Marshall Bernard decision of 2005 of the Supreme Court, which made it very clear what the terms were for establishing Aboriginal title in British Columbia. My view is that that it would be very, very difficult to prove that title. The fact of the matter is, if title does exist, where does that place the legislative authority of the province? I think it would raise it into huge question. So from a practical point of view, to suggest somehow that it exists is unrealistic. What we have to do is work with Aboriginals and others to ensure that no British Columbian gets left behind. I think that that's the basis here that we have to work from.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cummins. To Ms. Stirk now. Ms. Stirk, yours is the only party that really hasn't published a fully costed platform or a 3-year budget and fiscal plan. So how is the public expected to judge how a Green government would fund and pay for the considerable expansion of social programs that you are proposing?
Jennifer, the Green Party and everyone else in British Columbia knows that the budgets that have been published are fantasy. We saw that in 2009 when the BC Liberals proposed a deficit of $500 million. The Green Party looked at that and we said, I don't think so. It's going to be closer to 2.5 billion. We were told we were crazy, and we turned out to be right. And the NDP based their budget on that budget. And I think the same thing has happened this time. The BC Liberals have a fantasy budget that's based for the election, and I think the NDP has used that budget for the revenue numbers. We can't tell for sure because theirs is more a PowerPoint, but I would suspect that they've only eliminated the asset sales. The Green Party is not going to form a government, in our opinion. We want to go in, look at the books, look at the Auditor General's reports, and we will report back to the British Columbians as we get the information we need.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stirk. To Mr. Dix now on social policy. You have consistently criticized the BC Liberals for steadily increasing MSP premiums. If elected, will you reduce or eliminate those premiums for British Columbians?
No, we won't, because the reality is that we can't afford that right now. We're going to inherit a fiscal mess from the Liberal government, and we have to set our priorities now to deal with that. The fact is, the Liberal government over 12 years has shifted the tax burden onto the middle class. MSP premiums are part of that shift. But we're facing, frankly, our 5th straight budget deficit. That's what the province is facing, an $800 million deficit this year, a rising debt, and we have to set our priorities, and that's what we've done. We think in a skill shortage, it's important to ensure, for example, that young people get the training they need for the jobs of the future. We've made that a priority. We've made priority increasing completion rates in apprenticeship programs, and we've worked to ensure that young people have access to post-secondary education. For seniors, we've said the priority is home care, to ensure that in their homes, seniors can stay in their homes as long as possible, and that health care in the community is a priority for everyone. Those are our priorities in this election.
All right, thank you. It is time now for the leader-to-leader debate on social policy, and again, we'll be using the same format as before. Christy Clark, you have the first question for John Cummins.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cummins, you've accepted candidates who have attacked single moms, First Nations, and even a woman who sits on the Supreme Court of Canada. And a simple Google search would have told you what they have said about those people in the past. How is it possible, Mr. Cummins, that you could have accepted those candidates without knowing their views on these issues?
Well, thank you for the question, Premier. We did do due diligence on that, as I suggested earlier. We had a detailed questionnaire. We did criminal record checks, credit checks, and so on. We did social media checks. We went back as far as we could. Our volunteers found nothing, but they worked very hard to do it. The difference between BC Conservatives and the Liberals is that you have a candidate who's running in this particular election who was convicted of driving while under the influence. We had a candidate who the suggestion is, and the charges have not been laid, that he was driving under the influence. We got rid of that candidate. Yours stays in place. That's the difference between you and I.
You may respond, Ms. Clark.
Well,
Time's up.
Mr. Cummins, it is in this age, internet age, where Google is accessible to everyone, it is very hard to believe that you would have accepted these candidates without knowing about their views. I mean, one of them called one of the women on the Supreme Court of Canada one of the most vulgar names you can. And Mr. Cummins, I know you know how to use the internet. We all do. I can't believe that you didn't know those candidates held those views when you accepted them, and perhaps you only decided to fire them when people found out.
Well, if we had have known that, if we had have realized that these people had said those things, obviously we would have got rid of them. When it was brought to our attention, when it was found out, we immediately dismissed those candidates. We didn't waste any time. The fact of the matter is that's the difference between BC Conservatives and the Liberals. We clean up our mess. You don't.
Mr. Cummins, excuse me, it is your turn now, as this format continues, for you to ask Christy Clark a question on social policy.
Premier Clark, BC needs more trained engineers, business people, and medical professionals. So why does your government allow universities to discourage people from going into these professions by charging them higher tuition fees?
Well, Mr. Cummins, we've added 31,000 new seats to post-secondary education in the last decade in British Columbia. That's been a pretty good record for making sure that we are making sure that British Columbians have the skills that they need so that they will be first in line for the jobs of tomorrow. So he's right. We do need more people with business degrees and engineering degrees. We need more people in all of those areas. We also need more people in the areas of skilled trade. We are creating a huge new industry in liquefied natural gas, 100,000 new jobs in that area. We're going to need to make sure that our kids are trained up and ready to take those jobs. That's all part of the skills training plan that I've put forward in the last 2 years. We need them both. We need the professionals on one side, and we need people in trades training on the other.
Free debate, Mr. Cummins.
I couldn't agree more, Premier Clark, but the fact of the matter is that what you're allowing is those people who can create the businesses, the engineers, the business people, you are requiring that they pay more for their tuition fees. In other words, you're discouraging the poorer people in our society who have those talents to move ahead. At the same time, you've cut the level of funding for skills training. And so British Columbians who want to engage in skills training simply can't do it. If you're a welder coming out of grade 12, it'll take you to 2015 to get a spot in British Columbia, and you can take that same welder to Alberta and start next October. That's not a good policy. But that's the situation that we have here in British Columbia. You simply haven't done your job.
We will have to leave it at that for that particular interaction. Ms. Stirk, you're up next with a question on social policy for Adrian Dix.
Mr. Dix, on Friday, caller Lynn told us that she's struggling to get by on $540 a month, and you propose to increase that by $20 a month over 2 years. How is that going to help someone like Lynn?
We've made some specific proposals to deal with this issue of poverty, which I think is a fundamental one in our society. We've put in place, and we don't agree on all the details, but I think we agree on the direction. We put in place a BC family bonus that will ensure that families get $70 per child per month, including those on income assistance and working families. Secondly, we have raised income assistance rates. Thirdly, we've given the amount that all people on income assistance can earn while keeping their income assistance, giving an incentive for them to be able to keep more of what they have. And finally, for parents who see their earnings, their child support, 100% clawed back by the Liberal government, we're going to change that and reinstate a child support exemption for women, especially on assistance.
Ms. Stirk, you may rebut.
Mr. Dix, you can't really believe that $20 extra a month is a solution to poverty, or that bonuses, baby bonuses of $70 a month, when childcare can cost $1,000 a month or $1,500 a month, is really going to help a poor family get out of poverty. And where does your number of getting 8,400 children out of poverty by giving bonuses of $55 to $70 a month?
Here's what we've said. For a family of three, a single mother of three, to get $200 more a month is significant
It's a
when you don't
pittance,
have
Mr.
it.
Dix. It's
You
a
say it's a
pittance.
pittance. That's significant for them. Our investment in childcare will be significant for them. These actions will reduce poverty and lift 8,400
These
children
actions will
above the
not
poverty
reduce
line.
poverty.
Let's move on from this particular question because we have a final question on social policy from Mr. Dix. Back to Ms. Stirk.
One of the issues we haven't talked about enough tonight is healthcare. I wanted to know your ideas for improving our public healthcare system.
So the Green Party has great ideas for improving our public health care system. Many of them are similar to what I think you believe. We would bring services back into the community, and that would include services for seniors like home care and even assistance in the home for seniors that want to continue to live in their home. We would use multidisciplinary teams in community-based centers so that when a person goes in, they're known by the clinic, and they could be seen by a nurse practitioner or a nurse or a nutritionist or a kinesiologist or a counselor if that's the kind of service they need. And that we would use our doctors for the expertise that they provide for the families. And that's a preventive model. It's a model that's based in wellness and health promotion, and it's the only way that we can really have a healthy society.
You may debate.
I think this issue of healthcare shows a real difference between the Green Party and the NDP and even the Conservative Party and the Liberal government. The fact is the Liberal budget has within it, for example, $100 million less for MSP this year, $100 million less. And the Premier and the Liberal Party haven't identified a single cut or given any explanation of why they budgeted $100 million less this year than they did last year.
And
for
so
this
are
fiscal
you
year.
going to
So what our
vote to
priority
free
is? So what
MSP?
our priority is?
As Ms. Clark asked?
What our priority is are your priorities, which is in that case, what you're talking about is a cut in services. What the Liberal Party is proposing is a cut in the services every British Columbian get. That's not MSP premiums. That's the medical services program.
And that is time. Thank you on social policy. Let's move on now to the leadership debate. Excuse me, with the first question for Conservative leader John Cummins, and we want to discuss leadership. Mr. Cummins, as a federal MP, you were an outspoken maverick, some might say, who often defied the party line. But in the past week, you fired at least 2 candidates for essentially speaking their minds. How do you reconcile that contradiction?
Well, that's quite easy. I was or had a reputation as a maverick, and I've encouraged our candidates to be mavericks. And what I mean by that is I expect that our candidates will put the interests of their constituents ahead of the party. That's been our policy right from the get-go. And I think that that's the only way to go. What that means is that if there's a policy difference that our candidates and that policy direction that the party's taken, and it differs from the needs or the wants of that particular candidate's or MLA's constituents, that MLA is free to express the will of his candidate or of his constituents and buck the party, if you will. I think that that's healthy. It's good for democracy. What we're talking about is a reasoned and respectful and responsible debate. What we've canceled or pulled the memberships for, the candidacy, was not that. It was for irresponsible behavior. What we're looking at is candidates or MLAs who will represent and put the interests of their constituents first.
Thank you, Mr. Cummins. Ms. Stirk, this is the BC Green Party's 4th election as a mainstream party. This is your 2nd as leader. However, when it comes to the popular vote, your party's support is going down, not up. So how can you expect voters to view your party as a viable alternative here in BC?
Well, the Green Party is a viable alternative for the people of British Columbia. We offer a very different view of what the future of British Columbia could be, one that's based in strong local economies, where we invest in our communities so that we don't have this crazy economy where we say that one area of the province is where we're going to invest all of our dollars at the exclusion of other areas of the province. We need to also look at what we're doing to our young people. We tell them to go and get a great education, and then when they come out, they have a mortgage on their future because of the debt load that they carry, and there are no jobs that we can match them with. They get into low-level service jobs. So the Green Party thinks that we need to address all of those issues that are a drag on our society, a drag on our economy, and that don't create the kind of healthy communities that we know people need to live well in this province.
Ms. Stirk, thank you. Again, the topic is leadership, and our next question goes to Mr. Dix. Mr. Dix, during the 1990s, you were fired as Glenn Clark's chief of staff after you backdated a memo during a police investigation into then Premier Clark's actions in the granting of a casino license. Now, you say your actions were partly due to the stresses of the job. The job of Premier is much more stressful than the job you had back then. How can British Columbians be sure that they can trust you to be honest and ethical now?
It was my responsibility. It was my mistake. I take responsibility and have ever since. I was 35 years old. I made a serious mistake. And since then, and I own the mistake. No one else owns the mistake. I own the mistake. One of the problems we've had, I think, in recent years is no one takes responsibility for anything. I'm responsible. Since then, I became executive director of a nonprofit organization that promoted education across BC and had great success. And since then, I've been elected twice to the legislature, and I think done a good job representing people in Vancouver Kingsway and across BC. What I learned from this is we need to change our approach to politics, and I've done it. Over the last 2 years, in response to all of the attacks on this very issue, all of those attacks, I haven't run one negative ad against the Liberal Party. I think we need change for the better in our province. I think the issues I care about, child poverty and skills training and jobs for the future, are the ones that BC will support.
Thank you, Mr. Dix. Our final question on leadership, excuse me, goes to Ms. Clark. Ms. Clark, one of the major challenges facing your party is a significant gender gap and what appears to be your inability to inspire female voters, despite the so-called Families First agenda. So why do you think you are such a tough sell with BC women?
Well, you know, I think that as we get closer to Election Day, people, women and men, are going to get more focused on the real issues in this campaign and the real very clear choice that we have in front of us in this election. And I don't think that women are less concerned about the economy than men are. This election is about the economy. It's about whether or not we grow the economy or whether or not we grow government. Do we keep taxes low, freeze the income tax, freeze the carbon tax, or do we increase taxes to pay for ever-growing government? Because you know what? What I see in this campaign is I see the same old NDP playbook of spend, borrow, and tax. I don't think much has changed. From my point of view, we absolutely have to make sure that we're looking after people. And the only way that we can make sure that we can afford those services that many of the candidates up here tonight talk about is if we grow our economy. It's a sound, thriving private sector economy. It's saying yes to economic development that makes it possible in a rich society for us to look after one another.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. The leaders now have the floor with questions for one another. And our format tonight has Mr. Cummins up with the first question for Christy Clark.
Premier Clark, why would anybody believe that after 2 chaotic years of raising taxes, jacking up the debt, and pandering to insiders and special interest groups, that your government would do anything different in the next 4 years?
Well, in the last 2 years, we've been working hard to grow our economy. And in September 2011, we introduced the BC Jobs Plan. Since we introduced that plan, British Columbia has created 32,000 net new jobs, and we've done that at a time when there's been a lot of economic turmoil all around the world. We've done it because we've been focused, we've had a plan, and we've stuck with it. That's how you make sure you're looking after people. That's how we've balanced our budget, and that's how we've gotten government spending under control. And that's a big issue in this election. Do we grow government or do we grow the economy? Because ultimately, the only way we're going to be able to keep on the track of creating jobs in British Columbia is if we keep this economy growing despite what's going on around the world, in the world around us.
Mr. Cummins, you may debate.
Well, the fact of the matter is, Premier Clark, that you didn't get spending under control. Spending is skyrocketing with your government. What we're proposing is a fall session of the legislature that would be dedicated to getting spending under control. We would divide the legislature into 3 committees. One committee to examine the spending of government agencies and ministries, another to examine the spending of the the Crown corporations, and the third to examine the spending of the so-called such sector. If you turn the spotlight
Mr.
on those
Cummins, before we're out of
groups
time,
by
you proposed
the
to add-
committee of the legislature, I
proposed
think
to-
we'll be doing just fine.
You propose to add 30% to the provincial budget. That doesn't sound very conservative to me.
Let's
and that
move
is
on.
not a recipe for controlling spending.
We need to move on to our next leadership question from one leader to another. Ms. Sturk, you have a question for Mr. Cummins.
Mr. Cummins, in your pre-election platform, there's not a lot on democratic reform, but you do talk about that being something that's important to you. I'm wondering what your position is on things like proportional representation and the role of the leader. Do you believe that we should have any limits on the power of the leader?
Well, I think that, as I've said before, is that I think that what we need is to give our MLAs the license to speak up for their constituents and put the interests of the constituents ahead of the party. When you look at voter turnout is declining year after year in this province. One of the reasons is that people look at their MLAs, they see them simply as trained seals. They don't see them as being really involved in the business of government. I think that if you allow your MLAs to vote the wishes of the constituents, to put that ahead of their party, we'll all be better off. I think that that's very, very important. I'm not a big fan of proportional representation. I think that it does lead to an unstable government. I don't really think it's the way to go.
Ms. Sturk?
And yet, a lot of people believe that proportional representation of some form would encourage more people to get back into the legislative process. I agree with you. I think that people are turned off by what they see in the legislature. And part of that is that we have this concentration of power in the hands of the leader. And I'm not clear about your stance on that. I do hear that you want your members to be able to state an opinion on behalf of their constituents. But if you as leader disagreed with him, are you maintaining the role of leader as a person that can tell others what to do?
No, I think that what we should be doing is allowing, as I say, these MLAs to vote the wishes of their constituents. But I don't think that that's going to be the end of the democratic society. That system works very, very well in Britain, and I can see it working here in British Columbia.
Time, Mr. Cummins. Thank you so much. And this is our leadership focus. And we have the leader of the opposition presenting a question to the leader of the province. Ms. Clark, go ahead. Mr. Dix.
Thank you. Let's discuss accountability in its most basic form. What bond rating agency has confirmed your repeated contention that you're running a balanced budget?
Well, I can give you a quote from Dominion Bond Rating Agency, which said, "The agency is encouraged by the responsive measures taken in the February budget to restore fiscal balance." The rating agencies believe that we are on the right fiscal track. And why does that matter? It matters because we need to maintain our AAA credit rating, which is the best in the world. And it means that we need to it means that we can finally get British Columbia on a path to a debt-free British Columbia. We've worked hard. I've worked hard in the last 2 years since I became Premier to make sure that we are controlling spending. We're doing that better than any other province in the country right now. We're going to keep controlling spending. Unlike you, Mr. Dix, $3 billion in out-of-control spending, no plan to pay for it, and only bigger government at the end of the day. We are very different.
Mr. Dix?
Premier Clark, I don't think it's good for the province to run a fact-free campaign. The fact of the matter is, none of the rating agencies, not a single one, says what you've repeatedly said they've said. In fact, Dominion Bond Rating Agency, if you have the whole report there, says that you ran a $1.7 billion deficit. It's right there in their report. The fact of the matter is that we've seen repeated claims. A few minutes ago, you said that we had gained 30,000 jobs when we're in fact 9th in Canada in terms of job creation. What we need is a government focused on the issues of British Columbians, ensuring for our future prosperity,
let's be clear about what the choice is, Mr. Dix,
we
before we
need
run out of
skills
time.
training. And this is a difference, I think,
Mr. Dix,
between us and we need change in this province.
Mr. Dix, let's
More
be
of
clear
this
about the
same
choice.
Doesn't make
Let's be clear
sense
about the
for
choice.
I am
us.
afraid I have to
We are
interrupt
out
you
of time.
on this question, but in the format we have established, Ms. Clark, you have a question on leadership for Mr. Dix.
Indeed, I do. Mr. Dix, in your platform, you have promised $3 billion worth of new spending commitments. You have no plan to pay for them and a half-costed platform. How is it possible for you to convince British Columbians, tell us, that you have changed when you are planning the same kind of 1990s spending spree that we saw the last time you were in the Premier's office?
Well, what needs to change in British Columbia is just this sort of thing. I mean, the Premier has been saying this every day in the campaign. Independent observers checked it, and she's wrong. Every penny in our platform is costed, and every penny in our platform is paid for. And this cost compares dramatically to the Liberal record in this regard. I mean, bringing in the HST in the way that it was done after promising no, and then the Premier's own actions in trying to sell the HST is a contrast to our approach. There are really important issues we need to face right now in BC. We put forward a modest, practical plan that will bring change for the better. I think that's what people in British Columbia want. They're tired of a more of the same Liberal government.
All right then, Mr. Dix, if it's not $3 billion, if you dispute the number, then what is the number? How much are you planning to grow government if it's not $3 billion? Is it $2 billion? Is it $1 billion? Because you've made some pretty, hold on a second, you've made some pretty lavish spending commitments, kind of 1990 style spending equipment promises in your platform. So tell us exactly what that number is. If it's not $3 billion,
I think it's
I'm sure you know what it is.
I think it's extraordinary that a government and a Premier who increases the rate of government spending the last couple of years in each of the last couple of years, is lecturing anyone on this question.
I don't hear an
We've
answer,
said very
Mr.
clearly
Dix.
what all of our promises were cost, and you can find them in our platform as time runs out
still
at
haven't heard the answer, though.
bcndp.ca.
We need to wrap up, and I thank you for keeping to time. We are pretty much right on time. So let's continue to move on to the really tough questions. You can take a deep breath now because we're soliciting questions from our viewers, and we have selected a number that have been sent to us over the past few weeks via email and Twitter. Our first question is from Mark O'Connor in Victoria, and it is directed at all four of the leaders. Take a look at this question from Mark. If you could choose a Canadian political leader, past or present, to emulate, who would that be? Just 15 seconds for this answer, please, and we'll begin with Ms. Stirk. Ms. Stirk?
I would choose Flora MacDonald. I think she could have been the first woman prime minister in Canada if we'd had a different kind of context. She's a woman that even late into her 80s is still doing good work on behalf of women in places like Afghanistan. She'd be my hero.
Mr. Dix?
Well, an NDP Premier we're all proud of was Tommy Douglas. He ran a fiscally prudent government, like the one the NDP is going to run here in BC. He ran a province that also established a Medicare program in Canada that is the pride of our entire country.
Ms. Clark?
I would choose Lester Pearson. He put Canada on the map internationally. He stood up for our country firmly, and he was someone who could bring people together, too, in Parliament in leading minority governments. I think he was there's a lot to choose from, a lot of great Canadian leaders, but he's the one I'd choose.
Mr. Cummins?
Well, I would choose W.A.C. Bennett. I think Mr. Bennett was probably the best premier that any province in Canada has ever seen. He had a vision for British Columbia, and that vision just wasn't about growing industrial projects. It was about bringing government and the people together to make a better British Columbia.
Thank you for that. Our next question comes from Victor Saitra in Trail, and it is again directed at all of the leaders, so we'll have you listen closely. Are you in favor of decriminalization and or legalization and regulation of marijuana? Now, each leader has 15 seconds. We'll begin with Mr. Dix.
Yes, it's a federal issue, but the current federal government has in fact expanded penalties, which will cause significant problems. It'll be a very important issue in the 2015 federal election, but I support the decriminalization of marijuana, and I have for some time.
Ms. Clark, you're up next.
Well, I think it says a lot about your priorities when your priority is to lobby the federal government to make changes. I think what we need to be focused on is making sure we are growing our economy and looking after people here in British Columbia. I think we should be talking tonight about the things that we can do to put people to work here.
Mr. Cummins, your turn to answer.
Well, I think for a lot of people it's an important question. It's a question that and an issue that causes some upset in many families. It is a federal issue. I think that what needs to be done is I think that there has to be discussion not only within Canada but with our neighbours to the south.
Ms. Stirk.
It is a federal issue. The Green Party of BC is on record as saying that we would treat problematic drug use within our public health systems rather than the criminal justice system, and work with the federal government to change prohibition.
All right, let's move on to a question that has come in from a viewer since we began this debate tonight. It's from Rob Simpson in Victoria. His question is for all of the leaders as well. He wants to know if you leaders would reintroduce photo radar, and you have 15 seconds to respond. We'll start with you, Mr. Cummins.
I'm not sure that I would. I think that photo radar, as it was set up, was simply used as a revenue source for government. You would find it on roads where there was little or no traffic on a weekend, and but it wasn't doing what it was supposed to do to get those speedy drivers off the road.
Thank you, Mr. Cummins. Thank you. Ms. Stirk, your answer?
I don't think that things like photo radar are a way to get rid of the speeders on our road. We need to have some sort of program of education, some sort of higher police presence if we want to really get people to reduce their speed.
Ms. Clark, your answer on this question.
Rob, I've got a simple answer for you on that. No, the NDP brought it in. It was a mistake. It was a tax grab for the government, and I will not bring it back.
Mr. Dix, will your government reinstate?
No, I
photo
wouldn't
radar?
reinstate photo radar. I think our system of red light cameras is very useful, and I think it's important that we continue to expand that. And we really have to expand safety. We saw just this weekend how serious car accidents can be. We have to do our best to stop that, prevent that in future.
I believe that is a wrap for all of us. Did not that time fly by? How are you all feeling? I do not think we have time for closing statements at this time. Am I correct? We have time for closing statements. Excellent. Well, you kept to time very well. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Let's go to our closing statements. And let's start with Mr. Cummins, please.
Thank you. In their last budget, the Liberals committed to raising personal taxes, raising business taxes, and raising MSP premiums, but they still couldn't balance the budget. In their election platform, the NDP committed to raising personal taxes, raising business taxes, and broadening the carbon tax, and they still couldn't balance the budget. Both parties are cut out of the same cloth. I think it's time for a different approach. A vote for a BC Conservative candidate is a vote for a different type of government, a government where MLAs will fight for you, not special interests, where taxes will be lower and life will be a little bit more affordable. Tomorrow, my wife and I will get into our pickup truck and start again our travels around British Columbia. I hope to see you and earn your trust. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cummins. Let's go to a closing statement from Ms. Stirk of the Green Party.
Thank you, Jennifer. This debate is over, and now it's up to you to decide what kind of government you want. If you believe the BC Liberal pipe dream that we can sell off BC to China and have a strong economy and a secure tomorrow, vote for them. And if you think tinkering with our social services, like adding $20 a month to our welfare rates, is anything but change for the marginally better, vote for the NDP. But if you want real change, vote Green. When you vote Green, you're saying that you believe that people and the places they live should be the heart of strong local economies. When you vote Green, you're saying that government services should be available where people need them and where they live. When you vote Green, you're saying that you should count every day, not just one day every 4 years. Green MLAs will be your watchdog, your advocates, and they will, on May 14th, vote Green.
Thank you, Ms. Stirk. Ms. Clark, it is your turn for a closing statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you to my fellow leaders for being here tonight. And most of all, again, thank you to you for tuning in. I hope that you have found this informative, and I hope that you've gotten some information that you need to help you cast your vote on May 14th. I am asking for your vote, and I am asking for your vote because I believe in what we can achieve together, what we can achieve together to build a brighter future for our kids. There is a lot at stake in this election. Governments make decisions every day that can profoundly affect our economy. And there is a lot of risk when things go wrong. It takes strong leadership and it takes a clear plan to keep British Columbia on track. And that is what I'm offering. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. And finally to you, Mr. Dix, with your closing statement.
Thank you, Jennifer, for moderating tonight. Thank you to all three of my fellow leaders, and thank you to the viewers. This is obviously a crucial election for British Columbia. Do we want change for the better? A plan that puts British Columbians first, or we want more of the same of Liberal government? The Premier talks about big government, but in fact, what we'll be inheriting is big debt, big deficit, and big job losses. And that will require a focus on what's important, practical changes, like ensuring young people have access to the skills they need for the jobs of the future, ensuring that we address child poverty now, not 10 years from now, but now with our BC Family Bonus, and ensuring that children, especially children in care, get more support than they've had now. And change for the better means ensuring that our precious environment is protected, that pipeline decisions are made here in British Columbia, not in Ottawa. That's change for the better, one practical step at a time. I ask for your support.
And thank you very much to all four of you. That concludes our debate for this evening. Thank you to the leaders. Thanks to you for your attention. Please don't forget to vote on May 14th. None of this matters if you don't exercise your franchise. We invite the leaders now to step forward and shake hands, and we will say good night. I'm Jennifer Burke. Thanks for tuning in.